So with no further ado, we're going to move into this very important topic of AI challenges and opportunities for the information professional. A lot of people have referred to what's happening now in AI as a revolution. I think personally, I feel that that's a correct assessment, right? So this is sometimes called the fourth industrial revolution, or there's this kind of progression to enhanced work strategies, enhanced productivity around new tools that are available to us more broadly as a society. And we're going to dive today into kind of an overview of the landscape. And then I'm going to do a deeper dive into a couple verticals to really help us understand, tactically, what are these tools, and how are they being used in a couple of applications. This is obviously a very broad topic, so we're going to kind of scratch the surface today. But I would like to have people leave with an idea generally of what's out there, as well as maybe some specific tools or ideas they might explore and start playing around with in their own setting after this session. So as we progress through here, we're going to see that these tools have the opportunity to revolutionize the way that we're working, but at the same time, there are very significant challenges that we need to be aware of as we start maybe adopting some of these new technologies to use them ethically and effectively. So let's quickly define, this is the landscape kind of portion of the presentation, just quickly define what it is we're speaking about. So there's lots of definitions out there in the literature for artificial intelligence. So I'm just going to kind of broadly state that it's a science where we're seeking to create intelligent machines that work and react like humans, right? So moving beyond kind of brute force and programming to a situation where our technology can learn much in the way that small children learn: trial and error, repetition, correcting for errors, and kind of retaining that body of information to improve upon future performance, right? So this is a definition from ALA. But I would like to kind of take a step further into some of the language that's around this. So when I do my own reading on this topic, I hear these terms thrown around, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, deep learning. And I think it's easy to get a bit lost in the nomenclature. So I just wanted to kind of ground us in what these terminologies mean, and they're not really interchangeable, actually. So just to get an idea of what it is that people are speaking about when we read the literature. So basically, we have this kind of overarching concept of artificial intelligence that we've actually been working with for a long time, maybe consciously or unconsciously. So things like the very early rudimentary chatbots were based on kind of if-then statements would be artificial intelligence, right? So I have an example later in the presentation of how we use that at my own university. If you ever use something like Spotify or the Nest device for your smart home, those are things that are based on machine learning. And again, what's happening now is that we're seeing a progression from kind of the early technology, say rule-based chatbots, if-then statement, into natural language processing chatbots to make them more conversational and more user-friendly. So we're seeing things progress kind of from these early stage wider machine learning applications to what we would call deep learning and natural language processing that are subsets of machine learning. So some examples of natural language processing, which basically means you can just type in a phrase that you would use normally in language, and the computer is able to study, millions of snippets or billions of snippets of language to try to interpret and understand what those phrases mean, and then go look up, what would be an appropriate snippets of language to respond to you, and having more of a natural type of conversation, right? So that's kind of the difference between early chatbots and maybe where we're going with more sophisticated chatbots. Natural language processing is definitely something that's critical to things like Google search, right? Legacy search. So instead of having to know what your keywords are in a database, you can just type in a phrase right into Google. So we're kind of familiar with some of these technologies already. Where we get into, deep learning, which this is where instead of kind of what would be called brute force, just going the early supercomputers like Watson and Jeopardy is often cited in the literature because it was a very famous case of one of the early movers here. They're just kind of searching tons of data very, very quickly, faster than we can in our human capacity, and then responding. So that's kind of the brute force approach. And deep learning is trying to say, well, let's replicate that process that, as I mentioned, like small children might go through in terms of trial and error and repetition and learning from mistakes and improving performance. So that process is more about trying to be effective in getting an answer versus just using brute force to kind of look up a ton of information very quickly. And that's where deep learning starts to develop the capacity for judgment. So moving beyond kind of information gathering into the judgment space, going from left to right here. So, so an example would be that's often cited is self-driving cars because they have to interpret the landscape. Is this a stop sign? Is this a green light, right? So it's moving beyond kind of, I'm looking up data, describe a stop sign and answer a question that's being posed about it, and actually making judgments or decisions based on observations that the program is making. So this is where we kind of see ChatGPT coming in, because self-driving cars don't need to speak to us to kind of do that type of process, but ChatGPT is doing both. It's learning from repetition and activity generally, and also with you specifically when you put in prompts, but it's also using natural language processing to allow a conversational type of interface to occur. So, and that's where kind of Google search is today. They're trying to encourage. Yeah, I think Iris just muted everyone. Thank you.
Yes, I am so sorry. That was my mistake. I'm very sorry.
Okay, great. So we're back. Okay. So anyway, I was just mentioning this type of visual helped me try to ground some of the terminology I see thrown around in the literature. So next, I want to kind of discuss this transition from the Industrial Revolution to the Digital Revolution, which is really when we saw the rise of computers and computer power into what we'll call the AI revolution, sometimes called, the fourth revolution, which is really about replicating human brain activity, brain power, right? So a couple of key points to take away from the literature on this, and I think this article that I've cited here was kind of deliberately provocative in this regard, thinking about what does the future of an AI-enabled world really look like in terms of the good and the bad. But first and foremost, we are going to see a pace of change that is going to be very rapid, and a pace of impact that's going to be order of magnitude greater than the Industrial Revolution and the Digital Revolution. So we are going to see a big impact on the way that we live and work, right? In terms of our society, in terms of our businesses, including libraries, and just kind of life in general, right? So some key points from this article I want to raise are basically this idea about this idea about the digital divide I'll mention later in the presentation. So in terms of the way these technologies are implemented, they have a great opportunity for us, but they also have the potential for certain subsets or groups to be at a disadvantage or to be unable to use or implement these technologies for a variety of reasons. So that's kind of leading into some of our challenges that we're going to see in this presentation. We also see some things that are going to influence the way that economies and countries interact. So in addition to kind of at the micro level, increased productivity, say as individuals, right? I used as part of this presentation, because I wanted to be also demonstrated in the presentation, I used some of these tools to help craft my approach today. So it helps me on a personal micro level, right? and it can help us on an institutional level as librarians, but it can also impact the way that we interact, geographically. So this idea of reshoring was raised in the article, which I thought was really interesting. So we have things that we may have outsourced, like manufacturing or call centers, customer support, that are, for example, in less developed countries for US-based companies or firms. And now what's happening is with AI, you could delegate that to potentially an intelligent robot or a digital avatar. So there's things you could have these tools doing for you that you previously outsourced to another country. So what does that do in terms of global GDP flows, relationships of how people do business globally? There could be a very big impact, essentially, as just one example, on how we live and work, right? And I think it was interesting, this article raised from a kind of governance perspective that just as we saw the rise of chief technology officers in the digital revolution, we might see the rise of chief artificial intelligence officers or point people within organizations that are centers of excellence around the AI revolution. So as someone who kind of went through this digital revolution, I remember when I was doing my education and the internet was kind of new-ish. And I do think there's an analogy here to where we are in the AI revolution, because I recall, during my study, people saying, professors saying you can't use the internet because it's totally unreliable. There's lots of garbage out there, right? And that's what people are saying now about a lot of these AI tools. So I think we're at a point in that early cycle where down the line, these are going to become, much more ubiquitous in terms of their use. And so we need to be prepared on thinking about that. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the idea of, having a point person, but that we have to enable everybody in the organization to be with AI readiness, AI skills. And that's kind of the next point about the remaining employees have to be higher skilled. So sometimes people call this upskilling. Sometimes people call this, being AI readiness, AI enabled. So there's kind of so just as we wouldn't say today, we have an internet person in the library. It's like, well, no, everybody's using the internet, right? So we can't just say we have an AI person. Everybody has to be prepared to use AI because that's really where this is going. So this article kind of touches on those key points that I wanted to raise just to set the landscape a bit. Next, I'm going to raise a question. This is kind of our deep thought for the day, which is if we're moving towards, a situation where humans, where computers can play a lot of the roles that humans can play, then what will be the role of humans at a time when computers and robots can perform many of our tasks? Probably less expensively and just as well as we can, right? So what does that world look like? And this is where people kind of often say this would be AI augmented, or it would be an extension of what we're doing. So I want to raise kind of different scenarios to take the temperature of where people might be in terms of their own personal AI journey or thought process around this before we go into some kind of more specific examples. So here I have 4 scenarios from this article. So people who are optimistic, which basically means that that we're in a kind of utopian future where AI is going to be so terrific that it's going to solve most of our problems, and we're going to create incredible wealth and extend our lifespan, and computers might even just become our virtual slaves and doing all of our work while we can kind of enjoy kind of an ancient Roman aristocracy type of lifestyle where we have a bunch of leisure time to just pursue other things, right? So that's kind of the very optimistic. The pessimistic is basically that computers will overtake us and we'll become slaves to our computers. One of the examples I thought was kind of interesting in this provocative article was that we could have a scenario where humans are considered dangerous drivers, more dangerous than autonomous vehicles, and therefore humans are, from a legislation perspective, banned from driving vehicles. So this is kind of sounds disruptive or different, but it's just an idea to get us thinking about what the directions things could go in. And pragmatists are kind of somewhere in between, right? So we basically need artificial intelligence with guardrails. We need humans to be arbiters of what artificial intelligence is doing. And then doubters are saying that AI is never going to really be able to do tasks, especially creative tasks, to the ability of humans, right? So I wanted to see in a poll where people stand. I'm going to ask Iris if she can launch that poll for us and just kind of take the temperature of the crowd.
So
So I
I'm
think,
not able to
Iris, when you're ready, we can share the results. So a lot of us are in this kind of pragmatic camp, right? So again, with that article, I think that what's interesting is that it poses a lot of more radical scenarios to really get us thinking. So I'd encourage people to kind of take a look at that. I think it's good to have some healthy skepticism. So it's good that we have some doubters as well. But as we go through the presentation and I present some of this information, it'll be interesting for you to just personally reflect. Did you shift any of your thinking as to where you're at in terms of your feeling about these tools by the time that we end this presentation, or that you even do some independent look at some of the articles that kind of support what I'm going to present today? So I'm going to close the poll and we'll move on to, I'm actually going to start with opportunities because I think we can do some practical examples together on that. And then there's obviously a lot to say about challenges. So I'll share some literature on that as well. So the key points that we have here in terms of, and this is a very big space. So I've just summarized some things that I think are mentioned, most often in the literature, but there's obviously a lot out there. So I'll just mention we're really just touching the top of the iceberg today. Anyway, so in terms of opportunities, a lot of the things that I've read, for example, from Chetri, Nye, and colleagues, Lund, Adetayo are all talking about customer support. And we're going to do a practical example today about chatbots and AI-enabled customer support in the reference setting. There's a lot on research and learning support. I think some interesting examples from the literature, from my side, again, from some of the same authors, plus ALA themselves. And she did an interesting piece on this, talking about ways that you can customize search. There are even some tools I saw in some case studies, which are almost like a virtual coach. So they're almost coaching someone through the reference interview, so moving beyond just, here's some research suggestions, or here's what you can do next. I read an example about a chat type of bot being integrated into the learning management platform, where as you get close to a paper or an assignment being due, this AI-enabled bot is going to reach out to you as a student and say, hey, let me help you get started. So this kind of deals with issues around research anxiety, concerns about how to interact with the library. So it's really just kickstarting people in a low stakes kind of way as they're approaching these assignments in their learning management system, and kind of getting them started and reminding them to use the terrific resources that you have at the library and giving them practical tips and guiding them through how to do it. And this goes all the way up to things like tutoring, personalized tutoring, having a personal coach, things like that. So in terms of resource discovery, there are some interesting tools out there. I have some articles here from Lund and Grego and colleagues that talk about that in the references, but basically moving from kind of standard index type of searching into more sophisticated search for phrases and meaning within documents. We'll demonstrate one of those in the next examples. So cataloging, there's a lot to do here in terms of making traditional cataloging more efficient. So I think that, Vincent and the ALA and Adetayo do some good work on talking about that, but also I've read some interesting cases about things like documents that are handwritten letters or visual interfaces that are very different, have a very manual in terms of the tagging process, and using AI as a kind of companion to speed up that process and maybe eventually do some of this autonomously for us. Another area that I think is really interesting is accessibility. So I saw some interesting articles about our differently able patrons and how AI can deal with the approach. So there were some articles about, smartphones, again, having AI enabled services to help our differently able patrons. I think that was kind of another example of personalized kind of customer experience, but specific to the accessibility area. And finally, just overall efficiency, how we do business. So some examples from kind of the literature in that regard, from Das and Chetri, were things around interlibrary loan, or the way that we kind of manage some of our back end type of processes. So just using AI in our everyday, and also as individuals, right? As someone who is preparing for this presentation, right? Ways that we can make our individual workflows much more efficient. So I read a piece here by Lund where they do a survey talking about where librarians see opportunities in the college and research libraries. And so specifically reference, cataloging, and search are kind of overweight in terms of areas of interest that are some of our colleagues in that survey of 236 academic library responders in public service roles. This is areas that folks felt were high impact areas for AI. So I'm going to spend some time today going into those in a little more detail. And I'm going to start with, as someone who's a reference librarian myself, the reference frontier. So I have here kind of from left to right, kind of where we are and where we're going, right? And I know everyone is at different parts, different points in this journey. So I want to also just show you in a minute what some of these interfaces actually look like and how people are doing this in practice in our community. So we're going to start with kind of the typical chatbot type of experience. I think many of us, if we're not using it at our own institution, have at least had some kind of personal experience interacting with a chatbot. It could be something like you're making a purchase on Amazon and you use chat to solve a problem that you're having, right? So that could be what happens is it might start out with a chatbot. The chatbot can't resolve your issue. And then they say, do you want to talk to a person, right? So this would be kind of AI augmenting the customer service interaction, right? So we can also envision something like that happening in a library setting. So I have some practical examples I'm going to show you in a moment of that. The next kind of step, moving from simple kind of rule-based chatbots. If they say this, then you present this, and it's based on kind of keywords and predicting what they think you're going to be asking them, and then kind of doing a lookup of what the answer might be. I think the patron's asking me about library hours. Let me post an answer, which is the library hours page, right? So this kind of thing. And moving to what's in the middle here, which is a picture of ChatGPT. So something that goes into natural language processing with deep learning. So the idea is to move beyond kind of simple rule-based answers where you just program in advance. If it says this, then tell them that. and you move into kind of more sophisticated answers using conversational language that picks up on your tone, your intent. But these large language models, as good as they are, have the ability to get it wrong, or you have to be very good at prompts. So there's a whole science around correctly asking questions to get the answer that you want. And there's issues around training. So we have concerns about what data are they training on, and then we'll get into bias when we get into challenges in a moment. But ChatGPT is kind of the prime example of this kind of conversational generative AI type of situation. And on the right, I have maybe a frontier. Where is it that we could be going, which is the idea of digital clones. So this is using deep learning to mirror our own neural networks. And the digital clone basically trains on you. It's going to continuously train on the data set of your knowledge, everything you've written, if you're an academic, all the articles you ever published, every presentation you ever gave as a professor in your lecture hall. So the data it's training on is you, and it's becoming a surrogate for you. So I have here digital Deepak Chopra. I don't know if people are familiar with this, but I really got a chuckle out of it myself when I looked at it. But it's really interesting because the idea is to kind of make these tools look and feel very much like a human interaction. So as we move from left to right, we can see that there's a big change in the interface as well as the way that the customer experience might feel to a user, right? So there's just to kind of cite where we are. I mean, I'm going to give some very specific examples, but there's lots of chatbot examples out there, from University of Oklahoma to UC Irvine to Tsinghua University. So there's a global effort happening on chatbots with varying levels of sophistication. There's an interesting piece on the efficacy of ChatGPT for answering reference questions that I have in my reference list at the end of the presentation by Lai. But basically, Lai's research and College and Research Libraries in 2023 is saying that ChatGPT can answer kind of lower order questions very well, but it failed to answer higher order complexity reference questions effectively. So it's the kind of thing you might want to, and what they do in the experiment is actually take real reference questions they received, and then your response because you fielded the question and responded, say in some kind of platform. You can go up and look up what happened. And then you can feed those same questions into some of these platforms and see how effective they are at answering the same question. So that's what that research paper did. I thought it was an interesting approach. So now we're going to pause this and go into, I'm going to share with you a different screen with some practical examples of this, because I want people to leave today, maybe having an understanding of what some of these tools look like if you've not had any experience with them. And I know everybody here, like I said, is at a very different, we're all at different points in the journey, but it's absolutely clear that we will be impacted by these things. So it's good to know what's happening in our community. So I'm starting with that University of Oklahoma example. So this is Busy the chatbot. So I'll also drop some of these into chat really quickly. So people have that and can maybe, if you want, look this up and take it with you. I'm going to drop a couple of examples. I mentioned UC Irvine as well, so I'll drop this one in for you. You can see what these interfaces look like. So at my home library, we don't have a library-specific chatbot. We do have a chatbot for the university, which I kind of included a screenshot there in the PowerPoint. But I'm going to show you these pages because I think they're really useful to understand the order of magnitude in terms of what can occur. So there's kind of a whole background here on what University of Oklahoma did here in launching this in 2018. But I think it's interesting to see actually how busy has busy been, right? So this chatbot is actually kind of filling the gap, just like our 24-hour reference services people may use, for example, through vendors like SpringShare, consortium type of Q&A. Chatbots can play some of that role as well. And in this case, this is a 24-hour kind of service, 7 days a week. You can see the level of accuracy here they determine is 88%, kind of covering a wide range of topics, and very, very kind of somewhat successful here in terms of accuracy. So that was kind of interesting. If you're wondering, well, how do I communicate with patrons about a chatbot? I thought UC Irvine did a good job here explaining what their chatbot does, issues around privacy, and kind of generally how it works, right? And then if we go here, we can see where it shows up on their landing page. So a lot of us have kind of a general search bar and some basic information for patrons and quick links. And then they have here in the help area, different ways you can get help. And then they have here answers, which is their AI-enabled answers. And then you can go in here, you can type in your question and interact with the service, the chatbot in this kind of way, right? So that's our first piece. That was on the left-hand side. But moving to something like ChatGPT, right? We can see, let's say I had to ask, I'll just put in a general question. Right, so here's a situation where if you're going to put in general questions like this into a general service, you're not going to get really specific answers, right? If I wanted to know, let's say I want to ask a reference question. If I was preparing for a class presentation on the topic of today's presentation. Right, so here's kind of the general answers, but this is very different in terms of look and feel than what we might experience in a real reference interview, right? So the point I'm making here by showing you the free version of ChatGPT, which, again, I welcome folks to kind of try this on their own, but you do have to sign up for the service, is that I'm demonstrating here, this is very different than a standard reference interview, right? And you can, by improving the prompt, I'm an undergraduate student doing a class presentation on AI challenges and opportunities, and I need to include blah, 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 right? The more specific you make the prompt, the better your answers, the better the answers you get will be. And it's good to include things like who you are, so identity, what the question is, what types of constraints you want to put on there in terms of type of information you want to proceed. And you can iteratively say, I need more like this, or give me less information about this and more of this. So you can keep kind of refining your prompt as you go. So so for those of us who are kind of totally new to this, I wanted to demonstrate what some of this stuff looks like in the look and feel of it. And the idea is that within a library setting, so we just saw here, this prompt at UC Irvine looks something like this, right? But in the library setting, you would potentially be looking for even more refined or focused types of responses. So you can think about these interfaces and how you might tailor them in terms of, what are the benefits and pitfalls, right? Another one I'm going to demonstrate is Copilot. For my colleagues within CUNY, we do have access to this. So an interesting experiment I conducted for this presentation was to look at what Copilot would tell us about this question. What's the relationship between AI, machine learning, and deep learning, right? And that's kind of that layers of the onion Venn diagram I showed earlier on. And this is what it tells me, some of which is helpful. And there's some kind of links here, which might be helpful, right? But I asked them to give me a graphic, and I got this. So again, these tools are not performing alchemy, right? At this point, I mean, there's a lot of guidance, and this can be used for brainstorming, but it's really not oftentimes going to get you to the finish line as to what you need for your final result. So that was the point of this part of the demonstration. And then finally, I wanted to mention, as part of this vignette, digital depot, right? So for those of us who may not be familiar with this, I'm going to briefly play, I thought was a kind of interesting video from YouTube about this. So I'm just going to pause this here. This is obviously a much longer presentation. And if folks are interested, I'll just drop this into chat. But I think that, the point of me showing you this is really to demonstrate that this creates an interface trained on an individual that looks and feels very much like a real reference interaction. So when we think about the future of reference, and I just dropped some links into chat for you there, we can think about how we can move from these less sophisticated chatbots into much more sophisticated types of interactions for our patrons when we move from left to right here. But we have to take these things, with a grain of salt, because we're just not there yet. One of the interesting things in the reading I did is the person said, well, if you were just talking to a random person about a topic, they may be conversational, but also present wrong information. You wouldn't just walk up to somebody, at your local coffee shop and have a conversation and assume what they're saying is authoritative. And that's where you're at right now with ChatGPT in many ways, right? So the benefit of something more on the right-hand side is that it's expert trained on a specific subset of information that may be very specific to our craft or our field, right? So that's a different interaction, because then it's much more like talking to a librarian versus talking to some random person at the coffee shop in ChatGPT. So any case, the next two are a little bit more brief, so I'll just kind of go over those. So firstly, what I want to mention here with cataloging and archival is I'm not myself doing that work every day, but looking at the literature, I think that there were a lot of positive or practical ways that you could improve or augment the process. The ones that particularly I found interesting were moving from areas that are at least currently highly manual, for example, archival activities around artifacts that are handwritten or visual material like photographs or video, and or even they get an example I saw was dissertations. So moving to trying to extract metadata from great literature or from films, right? So those are things that there are some really good examples in the literature of how that process is enhanced, which ultimately gets us to a place where more information is discoverable. So I think that's a place that we all want to be at in terms of more and better information for our patrons. In one of the articles I read about extracting data from the Japanese extracting data from the Japanese American confinement records So the idea there is to better preserve our history, so this information isn't completely lost when the original documents, are just no longer intact. So there's a lot of work already going on in digital archiving, but the idea of these technologies and AI is to just basically make that process faster and more effective. An analogy or a comment that I read was that this is your kind of archival assistant, helping you move through that process. So in that case study, they were able to run and extract automatically using AI, extract correctly from over 220,000 images of these forms here. They were able to extract information and preserve that information and make it discoverable. So I thought that was a kind of a very interesting aspect or example. There are some other good examples. I'm just going to around extraction and translation. So making information discoverable in more than one language. So a lot of our, again, thinking about, most developed and least developed nations, a lot of our information is disproportionately focused towards English for our developed world. So a lot of these tools that are starting to emerge also help us not only with correctly extracting information, but then simultaneously translating it into multiple languages. So that would be another, I think, really interesting step change in the way that people can view and access information and make it more discoverable. So I'm just going to quickly show some examples of that. So this tool here, oops, I think I accidentally closed that one. Hold on. Here's video translate. So this is a tool, Hey Jen, which takes videos that you make. So let's say you're doing, an information literacy seminar. It can simultaneously translate it into multiple languages. So I immediately thought of the Baruch population. We have many languages spoken. Many of our students are non-native speakers. So something like this could be extremely useful if it's working correctly in terms of, expanding our reach. In terms of our, multilingual populations. This one here is, again, I'm not individually promoting that we adopt these tools. They're just examples of things that might get us thinking about where we can go in this space. So this example here is doing something like we saw before, extracting language from handwritten documents into text, right? So I'm going to next, in the interest of time, be a little bit more brief on some of the next topics. Right, so the final piece here from our kind of 3 areas of high interest in our surveys of colleagues was this kind of efficient frontier for literature review, right? So how do we ourselves and support our patrons in the research process? So on the left, we have kind of what might look like very familiar to some of us as kind of like a one search type of strategy. So how is the EBSCO Discovery Service kind of currently operating? It's basically kind of an indexing driven type of approach. Where on the right, I have some examples of Semantic Scholar, and I'll show you those now. I'll drop into chat as well, examples of how an AI-enabled deep learning approach would generate additional different results that you might not be able to achieve through, say, standard index. So I'm just going to share that briefly now. So here we have Semantic Scholar, right? So this is the interface. We kind of type in a question. So let's just say I typed in, the question for today's topic, our presentation, which is, a literature review. You're going to get articles with this kind of very brief summary. So which TLDR stands for too long, didn't read. So instead of the abstract, it's actually just very short summaries of what these articles are about. And then if you're interested, you can go into the abstract, right? And you can sort by relevance, you can sort by most influential, most frequently cited, right? I did actually use this one because I wanted to look at the global south, specifically with regard to digital divide in this presentation as I was preparing. So here's Semantic Scholar. Another one is Enlisted. So I'm just going to drop these examples into chat. So I want to leave some practical tools. And I would encourage you to absolutely do this yourself, just kind of pull one of these up and, see Elicit, which is another tool to kind of see what the look and feel of doing a literature review or a kind of building a list of references would look like. So this one actually do a summary. This is actually kind of much more what it looks like a literature review to us in academia. And then as you go down, you can look at the individual papers and get links to these papers. But it's not as easy to find the source documents as in Semantic Scholar, where I think it's a lot easier to kind of find and cite the papers in those tools. So each have their strengths, right? The other thing we could do is ask one of our AI tools to conduct a literature review. So here's another example of an AI tool called Claude, right? So let's say I mentioned Claude, you're going to get something much more done. So those are some tools. Claude is a little bit like a ChatGPT type interface. So we have, tools that I think are getting there in terms of the look and feel of what we might want in terms of help with a literature review. But I think there's a lot more to be done here in terms of showing us. These tools are not going to show us a lot of the stuff behind paywalls in our research collections. So now we're going to move to challenges. And I will say that challenges are, there are many challenges. Right? So I focus on one that are most frequently cited in the literature, such as bias, which is discussed, by our industry-based organization. All of these are really discussed by APLA, BCRL. But I think there's an interesting article on this from Bussar, Paul Ellis, transparency in terms of not really understanding how the AI models are making decisions were raised by Finlicht and even European Parliament are in their own regulations in this space. Specifications for those. Privacy is a huge issue, particularly with regards to how, in the library setting, if we're collecting this data and using interactions with individuals to train our AI tools, for example, in reference interviews, there's issues around that. So I think that, Lund and Chetri do a good job talking about, how we're worried about that maybe as a profession. Hallucinations means you're getting just fictional or incorrect information. So I thought that Cindy Coleman did a good job talking about that in my reference list. Cost, goes back to this linked highly to digital divide issues, right? So it's expensive to implement this stuff. So, I think Aganola and Chetri did a good job talking about kind of these developed countries and how cost as well as staff readiness are basically huge barriers to them, which goes back to this issue of the digital divide. And finally, staff readiness, which is a very big topic. So Taylor Pearson, Lowe and Tao, themselves talk about, are we as librarians, do we have the tools we need to effectively evaluate and use some of these solutions, right? People are worried about job displacement in all areas of society as well as librarianship. And ethical issues is such a big topic. I just raised a couple of examples here, but it really touches everything you do with AI. But some examples might be fake news or bad actors using AI tools for everything from fake news to impersonating people for identity theft or for other nefarious purposes. Things like cheating, whether it's intentional or unintentional, by using these tools, you know, and properly acknowledging our scholarly conversation with proper citation and attribution. You know, there's kind of a whole hornet's nest of issues around that, raising the literature, you know, by the ALA themselves, as well as lots of other articles from our colleagues. So I have this piece here that shows, again, from one's piece in the College of Music Libraries, that people are most concerned about challenges, are most concerned about challenges around fake news as well as data privacy. So here. So I have some quotes here that I also think are sort of instructive. Obviously, you can read them on your own, but kind of highlight a couple points here. So from our colleagues in the industry saying, why aren't we just kind of all, you know, adopting this right out of the gate? There's some issues here around the need for people to understand that even that search engines actually will do a better job at just kind of basic retrieval questions than even ChatGPT does right now. We just saw an example I raised with the library hours. If I ran a Google search on Newman's Library's hours, they would kind of say, you know, here's the page or the hours, like that information right away, whereas ChatGPT didn't do a terrific job just now answering that question, right? So we can't really use these tools as we would use the internet. So that's the first step. We need to educate people about what these tools are really for. Secondly, big citations around hallucinations. So our colleagues in the field are seeing big citations driven by what we call creative work in AI, work in hallucinations, right? And then we have here another example about, you know, in terms of the augmented work with AI, we need to recognize that for more sophisticated questions here, moving from how do we just teach AI cataloging what are terms related to epilepsy, tagging. But there's a whole discussion about, well, what if you have an article that just talks about medications using epilepsy that never says the word epilepsy? How does the AI know from a metadata perspective that this should be tagged as epilepsy, right? So there's some issues around how you train these, and maybe it's more work to train these bots, or sorry, these AI tools than it's worth, so to speak. And then finally, we have kind of a question here around again, you know, we don't want to adopt something that's going to create more work for catalogers. So if the information and metadata is incorrect and has to be corrected, that takes more time and money than just not using that at all. So, you know, so that's another way of saying we're at the frontier. We have so many challenges because we're at the frontier. So we're not going to have tools that are perfect yet. But when I think back to the early days of the internet, you know, it was pretty funky. And, you know, look at where we are today. It's a very sophisticated landscape out there. So I'm going to say two more things before I kind of conclude, and we'll take questions. So in terms of the digital divide, I just want to cite the work of Van Dyke to talk about the digital divide. So the World Bank also mentions that we still have globally 2.6 billion, or a third of the world's population, offline. We have 70% of all economic value generated from AI coming from the US and China. So there's a huge disparity already existing. The inequality that started telling us in the literature from Van Dyke is basically being compounded. So we have an existing digital divide, and then when the new technology comes out, just exacerbates, AI is exacerbating that chasm, that gap, right? So you have unequal access to technology, which puts you at a further disadvantage economically, which makes categorical kind of north-south and rural-urban type of divides even more significant in terms of ability to use these AI solutions. So this work from Glenn Robinson also really points to ICT readiness and capacity, which kind of more broadly speaks to AI capacity and our capacity as librarians to use augmented intelligence. So we saw a big gap from kind of north-south and rural-urban lines. And then finally, ethics. Like I said, it's such a huge area, but I really thought it was important to mention as we think about our ethical guidelines and how we implement and use AI, to think about this work from founding director of the Digital Ethics Center at Yale, which is basically, here's kind of a checklist of things we need to be thinking about in terms of our AI policies and procedures. So AI should benefit us versus harm us. We have a balance between AI working autonomously and intervention, and that we always need to be thinking about avoiding unfairness, issues around bias, and we should have explicability. So actually, this work we see here is implemented in the EU regulations, moving from ethics to regulations in the AI space. So I'm going to quickly share one more thing in this regard. Which is that this Claude chatbot is actually trained to be more ethical and responsible based on their training sets. Secondly, that there's a tool out here called GPT-0. What I'm demonstrating here, sorry, I went just trying to copy this. This will take just about 30 more seconds to piece this in. So this tool here, I typed in one of the prompts and the answers I got from one of the prompts in Claude that I just showed you. And I asked this tool, uploaded the file, asked this tool to scan it, and it correctly told me this was 100% AI generated. So when you think about ethical issues and cheating, this is the type of tool you might use that's out there. Also, we guide our students. I thought the APA guidance on citation was really interesting. So I'll just drop that into chat really quickly. So we have some guides, which I demonstrated in this presentation, about how you might cite and guide students to cite their use of generative AI in their presentations. So we're going to leave it at that. We covered a lot of ground today. I hope you guys saw there's some very practical, tactical things that I was able to share here. And I want to allow for some Q&A. If you want to type anything in. I'm going to leave you with my contact information as well.